Shalom, good morning. We start the book of Hosea today, doing chapters 1 to 6. It is what I call the glue to understanding Daniel and the New Testament. In other words, it gives a prophecy by the Messiah coming. Something's mentioned Daniel, and especially a good understanding of Romans chapter 7 and so in particular. Okay, some background to Hosea. Hosea is the first book of what the Hebrews call the 12, or what is otherwise known as the minor prophets. The name Hosea means salvation. There is very little known about him other than what is contained in his prophecies, judging by the time period of the kings during whose reigns he prophesies. This is mentioned in Hosea chapters 1 verse 1. Hosea's ministry extended from about 770 BC to 725 BC. The prophecies of Amos, a younger contemporary, are closely related to those of Hosea. Their ministries were different, however, in that Hosea was a native of the northern kingdom and Amos was a Judean who journeyed to Israel to prophesy. Hosea was called to exemplify the relationship between God and Israel through his marriage to a harlot, while Amos was sent by Yahweh to pronounce judgment upon the rebellious people of Israel. Hosea began prophesying at the end of a period of material prosperity under King Jeroboam II of Israel. You see this in 2 Kings chapter 14 verses 23 to 27. Unfortunately, however, during most of Hosea's lifetime, the people were spiritually bankrupt. Their leaders permitted them to practice idolatry. We see this in 2 Kings chapters 15:35, 2 Chronicles chapters 27 verse 2, and to commit spiritual harlotry against Yahweh. And we'll see this in Hosea chapters 1 verse 2, chapters 2 verse 8, chapters 4 verses 12 to 15. They refused to recognize that God had provided them with the wealth that they possessed, Hosea chapters 2 verse 8. In fact, they attributed their prosperity to idols, Hosea chapters 2 verse 5 and 10 verse 1. The people had become covetous and greedy, oppressing those who were least able to defend themselves. We see this in Hosea chapters 4 verses 2, 10 verses 13 and 12 verses 6 to 8. Despite the punishment that God promised to bring upon them in chapters 5 verses 9 and 10, there is a strong attitude of hope that is evident throughout the book. Just as Hosea brought back his unfaithful wife, in the analogy, Israel will be redeemed by God in the last days. We see this in Hosea chapters 1 verse 10 and 11, chapter 2 verses 14 to 23, chapter 3 verses 4 and 5, chapter 11 verses 10, chapters 11 verses 11 as well, and chapter 14 verses 4 to 7. So I always say you read or listen to the old chapters, but in this particular case, do it attentively. Indirectly, it has to do with your eternal salvation via the proper understanding of the whole Bible, and in particular the New Testament. You should see in chapter 1 verses 9 to 11, it concludes in divided Israel, that's 12 tribes, divided into Israel and Judah, being brought together under one head, being joined Messiah, as told in Daniel chapters 2, also in Ezekiel chapters 37 verses 16 to 19. And other places says it comes under the reign, under the genealogy of David. Yes, he'll come under the genealogy of David. See also Ezekiel chapters 36 verses 10 and 11 and verse 28 as to why did God show mercy on Judah and not on Israel. And we see the criteria of getting God's mercy in Exodus chapters 20 verse 6 and Deuteronomy chapters 5 verse 2. So Deuteronomy 5 verse 10. In other words, to those, I'll leave you to read it. Okay. A little bit so you understand what the story is about. It is an account of God's love for all Israel, 12 tribes. And also you see this in Isaiah chapters 49 verse 16, where he says he's written them on the palm of his hands, how much he loves them. So it's his love for them as a husband to a wife. even though she commits idolatry by going with other men. God therefore uses the analogy of two sisters and a husband to explain the prophecy in a way that humans should be able to compare and understand a relationship between a man and a woman. There is a deeper understanding, however, as to why Yeshua, the Messiah, came to redeem, or what I would say remarry in a way, adulterous Israel, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom who got scattered by Assyria. For example, only when a husband dies is a wife freed to remarry. And this is really what Romans chapter 7 verses 2 to 3 and 1 Corinthians 7 verse 39 is about. To properly understand these teachings of Paul in the context of Yeshua, one must understand the laws of God, especially in relation to marriage. I think the point is taught in a video on Romans titled Understanding Romans by Jim Staley, S-T-A-L-E-Y, which you can get on YouTube. It's either in that video or those 3 videos, so he goes through it in 3 videos, or also in a video that he has called Truth or Tradition. I say on YouTube by Jim Staley. First try to understand in Romans 1. Okay, let's get on to the actual Hosea now, reading a few verses. Hosea 1 verse 1. The word of Yahweh that came unto Hosea, the son of Beri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. Then he goes on to Hosea's wife and children. Verse 2. The beginning of the word of Yahweh by Hosea. And Yahweh said unto Hosea, Go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, because the land have committed great whoredom, departing from Yahweh. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. And Yahweh said unto him, Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu. Jehu was a former king, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel, part of the 12 tribes. Verse 5, And it shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel, and she conceived again, and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, Call her name Laruama, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and will save them by Yahweh their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, nor by horse, nor by horses, nor by horsemen. So how is he going to save them? We shall see by the Messiah. Verse 8. Now, when she had weaned Laruama, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, Call his name Lomi, for you are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, meaning Israel, You are not my people, there shall it be said unto them, You are the sons of the living God. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Now it would be another long study where I to explain the detail behind verses 1, 8 to 10. There you see it is about 2 divisions of Israel, the 12 tribes. Yet when the readers, or shall I say, when readers come to the New Testament, many readers Christian readers, the same event is interpreted as being to Christians. For example, in 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 10, which says, which in times past were not a people, but are now the people of God, which had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. People think it's talking about Christians, but it's not. It's talking about this tribe of Israel. The Bible in total focuses on the 12 tribes of Israel. Relevant other verses are Romans chapters 9 verses 25 to 28, Hosea chapters 2 verse 23, John chapters 1 verses 12, and 1 John chapters 3 verse 1. Isaiah chapters 11 verse 12 to 13, Jeremiah chapters 3 verses 18, Ezekiel chapters 34 verse 23, and 37 verses 16 to 24. It tells you about the prophecy of Israel being divided and reunited under one Messiah or King. On to chapter 2, Israel's unfaithfulness punished. Say you unto your brethren Ammi, and to your sisters Ramamah, plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, neither am I her husband. Let her therefore put away her whoredoms out of her sight, and her adulteries from between her breasts. So here God is using the teachings of the book of Hosea to show how his wife Israel committed whoredom, called fornication, when associated with God and false gods. Fornication is not about nothing to do with man and woman, as we saw, or hopefully you've seen. This analogy and representation is important to the understanding of what a husband under the law does in such situations, and how that wife can remarry only when the death of her husband is, which is why the Messiah came and had to die. Going on to chapter 2 verse 8. For she did not know that I gave her corn and wine and oil, and multiplied her silver and gold, which they prepared for Baal. Verse 11. I will also cause all her myrrh to cease, her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. Verse 13. And I will visit upon her the days of Baalim, wherein she burnt incense to them, and she decked herself with her earrings and her jewels, and she went after her lovers, and forgot me, saith Yahweh. Now I have included the above 3 verses to show sometimes the blessings even of life that God gives us is used to worship Baal, false doctrines, denominations, traditions, etc. of men. The verses says her feasts are not gods of Leviticus 23. They set up their own system and so forth, or even use his feasts, and sometimes did use his days, but to worship Baal on them. This leads people to wrongly use Isaiah chapters 1:14, which says, your new moons and your appointed feasts my soul hateth. And they use it as a reason not to keep God's feast of Leviticus chapter 23. They don't know the difference between God's and the people's. See also Amos chapter 8 verse 10. So do not use Isaiah 1:14 or any verse really as what people teach, not to keep God's Sabbaths or feast days. Verse 16. And it shall be that day, saith Yahweh, that thou shalt call me Issi, and shall call me no more Baali. For I will take away the names of Baalim out of her mouth, and they shall no more be remembered by their name. So Baalim is a name for gods. When you add I-M to word Bait, or Hebrew, or word in Hebrew, it makes it plural, just like in English you had the word S. So Baal becomes Baalims, God becomes gods. So God, anyway, to fully understand that, there's an article titled God and Son's Name, Yeshua or Jesus, on the website www.forwardtoyahweh.com. So moving on to Hosea chapters 2 verse 19. And I will betroth, which means make my wife, thee unto me forever. Yea, I will betroth thee unto me in righteousness, and in judgment, and in loving kindness, and in mercies. I will even betroth thee unto me in the faithfulness, and thou shalt know Yahweh. Verse 21, and it shall come to pass in that day, I will hear, saith Yahweh, I will hear the heavens, and they shall hear the earth. And the earth shall hear the corn, and the wine, and the oil, and they shall hear Jezreel. And I will sow her unto me in the earth, and I will have mercy upon her that had not obtained mercy. And I will say to them which were not my people, thou art my people, and they shall say, thou art my God. So, as I said, remember, it refers to Israel in chapters 1 verse 10, not Judah, and definitely not Christians, as Christianity is today. Hosea redeems his wife, which is Israel, not Judah. Chapter 3, verse 1. Then said Yahweh unto me, go, yet love a woman beloved of her friend, yet an adulteress, according to the love of Yahweh towards the children of Israel, who look to other gods and love flagons of wine. Verse 5. Afterwards shall the children of Israel return and seek Yahweh their God, and David their king, and shall fear Yahweh and his goodness in their latter days. Now the sums that this chapter says that Hosea paid, it equals 30 shekels of silver. You can see this in Zechariah chapters 11 verses 12 and 13, and Matthew chapters 26 verses 13, with the 30 pieces of silver Judas got for betraying Yeshua. Moving on to chapter 4, Yahweh accuses Israel. Verse 1. Hear the word of Yahweh, you children of Israel, for Yahweh have a controversy with the inhabitants of the land, because there is no truth, nor mercy, nor knowledge of God in the land. Verse 6. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Talking about the knowledge of God. Because thou hast rejected knowledge, I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God. I will also forgotten thee. Now there is a group associated with black Israelites who, some of them keep telling me that this knowledge is knowledge of who they are, i.e. black people who are Israelites. The verse does not say that. It says they've forgotten the truth. There's no truth nor knowledge of God in the land. So when it says that people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, it's a knowledge of God, not a knowledge of who you are. So, lack of knowledge means being ignorant of the truth, whether deceived or however. Maybe worshipping in spirit, but not in truth. The ignorant, those not following truth, are destroyed. In other words, they perish, die, the second death. It is essential we learn and obey the truth, not think that pure faith without works of the truth saves. The deceiver and agents would not waste their time and effort deceiving you of the truth if in the end God excused and saved you because of your ignorance. So please follow truth. So far we have seen that truth is to keep God's commandments, laws, and his holy appointed days, where you find in Leviticus 23. Psalm 119 verse 132. Thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. Hosea chapter 4 verse 15. Though thou, Israel, play the harlot, yet not Judah offend. Yet let not Judah offend, and come not you unto Gilgal, neither go you up to Bethaven, nor swear. Yahweh liveth, for Israel slideth back as a black sliding heifer. Now Yahweh will feed them as a lamb in a large place. Ephraim is joined to idols, let him alone. Their drink is sore. They have committed whoredom continually. Her rulers with shame do love give you. So I hope you get in the picture as we move on to a few verses of verse 5. Punishment for Israel. Verse 1. Chapter 5 verse 1. Hear you this, O priests, and hearken you house of Israel. And give you ear, O house of the king, for judgment is towards you, because you have been a snare on Mizpah, and a net spread upon Tabor. Verse 3. I know Ephraim and Israel is not hid from me. For now, O Ephraim, thou committest whoredom, and Israel is defiled. They will not frame their doings to turn unto their God, for the spirit of whoredom is in the midst of them, and they have not known Yahweh. Verse 15. I will go and return to my place till they acknowledge their offense and seek my face. In their affliction they will seek me early. Chapter 6 verse 1. Israel rebels. Come, and let us return unto Yahweh, for he hath torn, and he will heal us. He hath smitten, and he will bind us up. After 2 days will he revive us. In the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. Then shall we know, if we follow on to know Yahweh. His going forth is prepared as the morning, and he shall come unto us as the rain, as at the latter rain and former rain upon the earth. Verse 6. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. But they, like men, have transgressed the covenant. There have they dwelt treacherously against me. Verse 10. I have seen an horrible thing in the house of Israel. There is whoredom of Ephraim. Israel is defiled. So, brethren, have you noticed so far the Bible is about the formation of Israel from Adam, Noah, Abraham. Then they divided into 2 kingdoms, and since then the account has continued still only about them. Gentiles, either kings or nations, only came into the narrative when they came under the same spotlight as shone on Israel or Judah. Shalom until tomorrow. Happy studying.